The 1956 Olympic Water Polo Semi-final match in Melbourne, Australia, between Hungary and the USSR embodied the fierce resistance of an oppressed nation. An ordinary water polo match between Hungary and the Soviet Union became a gripping symbol of political tension and national resilience due to the backdrop of the Hungarian Revolution, where citizens rose against Soviet domination only to be brutally suppressed. All analyses. This video will examine 5 main concepts around this incident: the background of the crisis, the first demonstration, the intersection of sports and politics, the actual semi-final, and the aftermath of the match and the revolution. Please note that all sources will be linked on my website, which is accessible through my channel. Excuse my pronunciation, I will try my best, and as always, take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Now onto the video. In 1945, Nazi-occupied Hungary had a glimpse of freedom when the Soviets defeated the Nazis. However, the Soviets unfortunately forgot to do one thing. They forgot to leave. At the beginning of the Cold War in 1947, the USSR seized power over Hungary and installed a communist government led by Matyas Rákosi. This caused communist power to strengthen across Hungary between 1950 and 1953. During this time period, communist power strengthened. The AVO, who were secret political police, oppressed everything in disagreement of them and communist values, and terrorized Hungarian society. Secret files were made on nearly every citizen. Torture and executions became a normal sight for Hungarian citizens. 600,000 people were captured by the AVO, most deported to gulags, and 2,000 were publicly executed. Following Stalin's script, Rákosi dismantled free press, nationalized all industries, creating collective farms, and eliminated political opponents. The communists forced Hungary's best creatives to become Stalinist collaborators. They falsified history and joined with Rákosi. Language itself became a tool of oppression. Every word could be a lie. It was called the People's Democracy, yet it was neither the people's or a democracy. However, after Stalin's death and the announcement by his immediate replacement, Nikita Khrushchev, and the appointment of Imre Nagy, the chains holding Hungary were loosened. Thousands of political prisoners were released from gulags, also known as labor camps, and free press was allowed and promoted. However, in early 1955, Nagy was dismissed, arguably due to Moscow feeling threatened by the new liberal Hungarian rule. Nevertheless, the freedom of spirit had already been spread across Hungarian society. Regardless, Soviet troops occupied the Eastern Bloc again when the USSR forced all satellite states to join the Warsaw Pact. The Soviet Union ultimately dominated and controlled the pact and its members and used it to subdue unrest in the satellite states. Through Hungary's brief experience of freedom, tensions began to rise and citizens became increasingly defiant and reckless. On October 23, 1956, the first demonstration under the Iron Curtain would occur, and this catalyst would lead to Hungary's 13 days of freedom. A group of university students, sick of the Hungarian repression, arrived in Budapest with a 16-point list of radical demands for Hungary's future. Leading these demands was a group known as the Potofi Circle, who were radical Nagy supporters. On the same day, the Soviet government banned protesting. Outraged, Hungarians heard of this and immediately flocked to the streets to begin the march to Parliament and join the students. Geru, the Prime Minister at the time, dismissed the protesters and ordered the AVO to break up the demonstration. The AVO opened fire on the crowd. Hungarian soldiers responded, and the riot lasted 5 hours. Soviet troops and tanks entered Budapest only to be subdued by Colonel Paul Maleta and his men. Workers tore down a statue of Stalin, and Hungarians rejoiced as Nagy resumed his place as Prime Minister and created a new democratic system only 4 days later. On the 28th, the Soviets officially withdrew, and Nagy and János Kadar, the General Secretary, broadcasted to Moscow and told the Soviets to accept their reform demands. Unknown to Nagy and the Hungarians, Kadar had conspired with the Soviets, and 3 days later, he and the Red Army destroyed the revolution. 2,000 Soviet tanks were sent into Budapest, with 16 divisions of soldiers, and Kadar proclaimed himself head of the government. Hungary's 13 days of freedom had ended. 2,000 Hungarians died, tens of thousands were arrested, and 200,000 fled the country. Following the revolution, Kadar began a brutal campaign against Hungarian freedom fighters known as the Bloody Retributions. On the 16th of June, Nagy and other revolutionary leaders were executed, their bodies stripped, and they were buried in unmarked graves. The crisis of the Hungarian Revolution had ended, but it wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. In the 1940s and 50s, sporting success is seen as a way of validating the entire communist system. Though Hungary was a world-class water polo power, the Soviet Union's own squad was an embarrassment, so the Soviet sports authorities ordered the Soviet water polo team to start training with the Hungarians in Budapest. The Russians went, observed, filmed, copied, and got better. A 1956 Russian player would say that the Hungarians were the best in water polo. They were the masters of the game. Our team had a lot to learn from them. The intersection of sports and politics is deeply entwined, as national identity is often expressed and reinforced through sports. We see this in other historical events, specifically ones that occur at the Olympics, due to the worldwide stage. Examples of this are the 1968 Mexico Olympics, where two athletes gave a power salute in order to bring awareness to racism against African Americans, and in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, Adolf Hitler used this stage to promote Nazi propaganda. The 1956 semi-final match between Hungary and the USSR was an especially accurate representation of this phenomenon. The match was a stage for the Hungarian players to assert their national identity and their defiance of the Soviet regime. Just like many past political leaders, the Hungarians recognized the importance of the influence of sports in shaping the public's view and fostering national identity. The Hungarians recognized that if they wanted the revolution to gain any sympathy or care from the Western world, then they needed to do it at a world stage. Furthermore, sports can amplify political tensions due to the emotions and passion of both the players and the crowd. Due to the clear bias of the crowd in Hungary's favour, the players were likely egged on along with the ever-present stress they kept for family members back home in Hungary. This dynamic highlights how sports not only mirror but also shape the reactions that characterize political environments, transforming sporting events into pivotal occasions of both national and global importance. Shouts resonated around the Olympic swimming and diving stadium in Melbourne, Australia. To the world, this match was a response from symbolic Hungarian freedom fighters against Soviet oppressors. For the Hungarians, being in the national team was greater than recognition. It was a rare taste of freedom, and the only chance to ever leave Hungary and see the outside world, as quoted by a Hungarian player. When the Hungarian team arrived in Melbourne, they found out that the revolution back home had been turned into a counter-revolution by the Soviets. They were outraged and staged a simple protest by tearing off the communist Hungarian flag and replacing it with the banner of Free Hungary. Approaching the match against the Soviets, the Hungarians had a plan to provoke the Soviet players until they responded violently, which would give the Hungarians a penalty. The strategy worked as the Hungarians led 4-0 in what turned into a brutal defensive match. Near the end of the final quarter, a Russian player, Prokopov, and Zador, the star of the Hungarian team and possibly one of the best water polo players, played against each other. 2 minutes from the end, Zador, distracted by the umpire's whistle, was hit by Prokopov. Zador stepped out of the pool with blood running down his face from his eye, which is where the famous photo of the match originated from, as seen on the screen. Fortunately, the police and Olympic coordinators had planned for this. If not, the fans likely would have rushed from the bleachers to attack the Soviets. Police stood in a corridor so we could walk because of the roar, and people started throwing things at us, a Soviet player recounted. This dramatic clash channeled the Hungarian team's anger into a symbolic win against their oppressors, demonstrating how a sports competition became a response to a national crisis. The match instantly made headlines around the world, and Western society was finally aware of the terrors occurring in Hungary. However, it would take another 35 years until Hungary was free from Soviet oppression. The press called the Russians barbarians, but as the Hungarian water polo captain, Garmati, would come to say, they were barbarians in other ways, but not in this game. Zador would also say they, the Soviets, were as much of a victim of the circumstances as we were. The next day, the Hungarians won the gold medal against Yugoslavia. A Hungarian player expressed his pride by describing his feelings after the game. The ultimate revenge, the ultimate joy, was receiving the gold medals. The Russians had invaded Hungary. They beat the revolution down, but the Hungarian water polo team could not be beaten. We won. It was a tremendous satisfaction. Several countries extended invitations to the Hungarian Olympians to defect. Zador and half of the water polo team defected, along with 40 other Hungarian Olympians. For the next 33 years, Kadar led Hungary and labelled the events as a counter-revolution and called all participants traitors. However, the revolution echoed across the globe and became a worldwide symbol of freedom. Nevertheless, when Kadar was removed from power in 1989, and on July 16th, the same year, Nagy had a public reburial. 48 hours later, Kadar passed away. The next year, Hungary became a multi-party republic, and the year after that, the final Soviet troops withdrew. This dramatic clash channeled the Hungarian team's anger into a symbolic win against their oppressors, broadcasting the power of the spirit of freedom worldwide. Hungary and the USSR's 1956 Olympic Water Polo Semi-final match in Melbourne was a reaction to the conflict of the Hungarian Revolution. The events leading to the revolution and the oppression that Hungarian citizens faced due to communist rule drove residents to revolt against Soviet occupation. The Soviets escalated the situation with a violent response that caused mass death and chaos in Hungarian society. These tensions back home influenced Hungarian players to play a brutally defensive match against the Soviets. However, as the Hungarians held gold medals up in the air, pride in their nation echoed across the world. This would contribute to the spirit of freedom that was subdued in Hungary for 35 years before Hungary was finally free again. If you liked this video and want to see more of the same type, please subscribe to the channel and comment down below your opinions or suggestions for any other videos. Thank you.